The Colorado Avalanche cap situation may be the most unknown in the NHL because of the situations with Landeskog and Nichushkin, but I'm going to do my best to break it down and show you where they're at. So before we get into the Landy and Nichushkin stuff, we actually need to remove them from the conversation and set a baseline for Colorado's cap this offseason. When you remove Landeskog and Nichushkin's cap hits, the Avs currently sit at a cap hit of $64,783,750 for next season, with 7 forwards, 4 defensemen, and 2 goaltenders on their NHL roster. Neat number, but meaningless without the salary cap maximum, which, while there is no official number yet set by the NHL, the most verifiable reported number out there, including sites like Cap Friendly have, is $87.7 million. So that leaves the Avs $22,916,750 of cap space to fill in 5 forward spots and 2 defensive spots, plus whatever scratches they want. This is the absolute baseline minimum the Avs are operating off of going into this offseason. But there is still one more thing the Avs need to do before you start having the conversation about Landeskog and Nichushkin. The Avs have one RFA on their roster, and that's Casey Mittelstadt, who the Avs will extend this offseason one way or another. So that marks an 8th forward on the roster and one more contract. While we don't obviously know the details of that contract yet, I am setting Mittelstadt's number at $6 million because that is the highest end I really see it going. Mittelstadt, a player who has never hit 60 points, I think that's a realistic ceiling. There's a decent chance that number ends up being lower than that, and then you can add $500,000 or $1 million more to these calculations. Great for the Avs. At that $6 million number, that leaves the Avs $16,916,250 of cap space left for 4 forward spots, 2 defensive spots, and their scratches. And this is really the number you should be working from, more or less. Add $1 million, take $1 million for the Avs cap hit this offseason. From here, there are 3 scenarios that play out with Landeskog and Nichushkin. Number 1, neither player returns to the Avalanche. Landeskog is out and cannot play, perhaps this season, perhaps never again, and Val Nichushkin's contract, suspended through mid-November, ultimately gets terminated, or he gets moved, or whatever. That leaves the Avs this full nearly $17 million to fill those roster spots, and they basically can do whatever they want. Internally, the only 2 major players they would be bringing back could potentially be Jonathan Drouin and Sean Walker. If you wanted to bring back both in this scenario, you could, and then fill out the edges of your roster. If you wanted to bring back just one of them, you could, and then target a bigger name free agent or potential trade target this season. And if you wanted to bring none of them back, you could really go hard in both the trade market and free agency. In theory, if everything goes perfectly, I think the best case scenario for the Avs is this is the conversation across the offseason and opening day. And then later on in the season, Gabe Landeskog gets healthy and joins the team near the end of the year when the cap hit has minimal remaining on it for the season. So that's scenario 1, maybe the least complicated decision-wise of any of them. And certainly it gives the Avs the most freedom to do whatever they want, wherever they want. Scenario 2. One of Gabe Landeskog and Val Nichushkin return next season. In this scenario, if it is Landeskog, it's $7 million off the cap. In Nichushkin's case, it's $6.125, so almost $1 million cheaper. But I don't think that makes a big significant difference in the way the Avs would approach the scenarios. For the sake of what I believe would happen if this does end up being the scenario, I'm going to take Landeskog's money here as the one we're operating off of. And with Landeskog back in the lineup, you would now be down to 3 forward spots and 2 defensive spots, and you would have just shy of $10 million to work with to fill those spots. In this scenario of Drouin and Walker, you're only bringing back one of those 2 guys. You won't really have room for both. Let's face it, if you have the choice, it should be Jonathan Drouin. And realistically, I've penciled that Jonathan Drouin number in at around $5 million. Again, same as the Mittelstadt deal. Maybe it ends up being a little bit cheaper than that. Maybe it ends up being a touch more expensive than that, but a reasonable estimate to give us numbers to work with. So when you add Drouin to that total with Landeskog, you are now down to just shy of $5 million to work with to get those last 4 spots sorted. Now, however you sort those spots is up to you. $5 million is definitely enough to do it. You can bring back someone like a Brandon Duhaime with that type of money. You can go out and get someone that you like as a bottom 6 forward if you target a reasonably cheap one. You can experiment with players like Sam Malinsky on your back end, or you can go get 2 bottom pairing guys, whoever those might be. Honestly, this scenario gives me a lot of confidence that the Avs will be able to work together a pretty good team this offseason. Between this and the first scenario, I think they're by far more likely the 2 to happen than the third one coming up here, and the Avs will be able to navigate that without much trouble. Third scenario here is where both Landeskog and Nichushkin return to the Avs. I really think this scenario is extremely unlikely, but it is something that could theoretically happen, at least once Nichushkin's suspension is up in mid-November. So while you do have to operate with some 13th forward shenanigans in the first month of the season, what you are essentially looking at for a cap hit is that original number with Mittelstadt signed at just shy of $17 million, minus both Landeskog and Nichushkin, which is $13.125 million, which leaves you with just $3,791,250 left to fill in the rest of that roster, which would be 3 forward spots and 2 defensemen. So Jonathan Drouin getting re-signed is out of the question for sure, and even then, you are dealing with a really tight roster construction. You almost certainly need a cheap contract like Sam Malinsky on your bottom pair for your defense, and even then, you'd be scraping by with league minimum contracts on your 4th line and likely running none or maybe barely 1 scratch for the year. It would be extremely difficult for Colorado to put a quality roster together top to bottom with this scenario, but you would also have Landeskog and Nichushkin in your top 6, so there's definitely some give and take there. Ultimately, though, those are the 3 scenarios I see playing out, give or take $1 million here, $1 million there to make player deals work, depending on situations like Mittelstadt's and Drouin's. Honestly, regardless of the return of Landeskog and Nichushkin, no matter what, it's certainly for the first 2 scenarios, and honestly, even for the third, you feel like the Avs have a pretty good opportunity to build a very, very good hockey team this offseason. So maybe I've worried a little bit too much about this for nothing. Whoever the Avs sign, you know I'll have a video for you about it here on DNVR.